Hello out there in YouTube land.
Welcome back.
Today we're going to talk about what is one of my personal favorite all-time films. And that's The Warriors.
Now that is loosely based on the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The book is by Saul Urich.
and that is more of a dystopian setting, and they will tell you that.
Yeah. Though it is still New York and it's still gritty
Right.
New York streets, it's a bit more descriptive as the dystopian, whereas the movie is definitely 1970s New York. You can't avoid that at all.
It's got the grit, it's got the grunge, it's got New York in the 70s.
I mean, it's even got, they have no way to communicate between the different gangs so they use a radio DJ.
Yeah.
So that's something that doesn't exist anymore. Now everybody just texts or whatever, but back then that wasn't an option.
No. The phone...
You had to stop and you had to call on a payphone.
Or the phone was attached to the wall in your house.
Yeah.
Something like that, you know.
Yeah, there was no connections like there are today.
Anyway, the movie really picks up, on the gangs, the gang warfare, kind of the badassery.
Yeah. I mean, basically the story is that you have this gang from Coney Island called the Warriors, and they're just living their life, and there's a big gang on the main island in New York, and in Manhattan. And the leader of that gang decides that he's going to call a big meeting of all the gangs in the whole New York area so that they can all kind of join forces together to create kind of a network system, and also to try and stop the animosity and violence between the different gangs, so that everybody can kind of live cohesively in a somewhat peaceful fashion. So, because this leader calls this meeting and he's like the head of the biggest gang, all the other gangs are kind of required to come. Right. So, of course, the Warriors hop on the subway and go into Manhattan.
It's kind of like having the big alpha wolf.
Yeah, or
you go.
Like in a mafia setting, you'd have the Dawn call. Dawn. So, the meeting goes okay.
It goes okay.
Until, well, the head of the gang that called the meeting gets assassinated.
Yeah. That minute detail.
Yeah. And then the asshole that assassinates him blames it on the Warriors.
And that sparks the keg, so to speak. One thing that is unique with this is you have an all-female gang.
Yes.
And that's not something you see in just about any other movie really involving.
No. And, truthfully, that's where the screenwriters and the director, Walter Hill, they were progressive. And not only did they have a female gang, but they actually incorporated real gangs that were in New York at the time in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons the movie didn't take off at first was that there were actually, like, murders and stuff at some of the movie theaters because, like, the gangs took offense at different things. So they had to actually pull all the production, like, beginning, like, advertisement stuff and everything, and then finally when stuff calmed down, they're able to get stuff back up, but by that time, like, the movie had, like, basically run its course.
Right.
So it actually, the Warriors got its legs on, like, HBO syndication and home video and all this other stuff. And that's kind of how it's, like, trickled its way in. But what's really neat is, like, one of my favorite gangs is the Baseball Furies. And that's where you have these guys with this crazy face paint run around in New York in these old-fashioned baseball uniforms with baseball bats.
Yep.
And they use them for what you can guess they use them for.
Well, yeah.
And then there's one gang that's on roller skates, which is insane.
Can you imagine? Not only for the actors, but could you imagine, like, an actual gang that rolls?
Yeah, in a way that's kind of frightening. You imagine being a lone person walking on the street in New York, relatively late at night, and there's suddenly all these guys show up on roller skates with weapons.
Also a sign of the time, roller skates.
Yeah. So it's just very interesting. But of course, and spoiler here for anyone who hasn't seen the film, my favorite scene is at the end, where the guy who assassinated the head of the other gang shows up in a hearse. And this is after the Warriors have finally gotten to Coney Island, and this guy's waiting on him because, of course, he wants to eliminate the Warriors so he can show out to be the hero,
Right.
even though he's the one that caused the problems in the first place. And I freely admit to clacking the beer bottles together. I've done that in my life. This actor takes these beer bottles and he puts them on his fingers and his thumb. He clacks them together like clack, 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 and then he sings, "Warriors, come out to play." And my mom, when she first saw the movie, was so annoyed by this. I mean, she was just like, "That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life." She was so mad. And me and Dad are just like, "Hey."
Of course.
So, of course, we got the stuff to be able to mess with her. Well, as usual, that did not go very well.
It never does.
But one thing that actually surprised me about it is that how heavy it was to try and clack the beer bottles together.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think about trying to do 3 of them at once, how much weight that would be on your hand.
Try it.
It's tough. And the actor that played the character actually said he got the idea from a bully who attacked him when he was growing up. There was this kid on the street who actually went after him with a sing-song voice like that and was clacking beer bottles together. So that wasn't even in the script, and it's not in the book, but that's what he did because for him as a kid, it was so intimidating.
Right.
And it is bizarre. I'll give it that. I don't know about intimidating, but it's bizarre.
It's bizarre.
And I'm not going to spoil the ending of the movie because you've got to watch it now if you haven't. But The Warriors is a unique film.
It is. It stands out on its own. I really don't think there's been much.
There's no other
that really
gang films that are similar to it. And the other thing that's kind of cool is that, the way the gang works together to try to survive.
Excuse me. It's been a day.
Yeah. Has no bearing on the movie.
No. How they survive is a different dynamic, especially if you're looking at it. If you're analyzing it.
Yeah.
Like, you're not in the movie, but you're kind of analyzing it. It's very interesting.
And especially, looking at it through modern eyes, it's really shocking and horrific. But for those of us that grew up in the 70s, a lot of it's normal. Frankly. Which is kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I was an 80s kid, and it's still
didn't... the late 70s and early 80s, because The Warriors the film came out in 1979, so it really cusped that, whole area. Things were, publicly very gritty then.
Gritty, offensive.
Yes.
And they didn't give a shit.
No. If you said you were offended, you would get laughed at, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it was. Nobody gave you an inch of anything.
Yeah.
And you can say a lot of things and get into, the socioeconomic connections with that, but it's a fact. And so those of us who grew up during that time, looking back at it, we can see how different things are compared to now and then. People, I think, younger generations that would watch it now would just be like, "Oh my God, this is such a horrible, offensive movie." But those of us that lived it, it's just realistic what the time was like.
It is. It's not...
It's not meant to be an offensive film. It's just showing the reality.
Showing the reality, and it does tend to get under your skin, and it's supposed to. That's the point of it.
Yeah.
It's not that it glorifies gang life.
No,
in the least.
whatsoever.
It actually does the opposite.
Yeah, it shows this is some of the horrible crap that happens. You should stay away from this because you could be involved in a mess like this.
Right.
Type message. But, I think that it's an important film also in its connection to horror, because while it's not a horror film, it's an action film, there's certainly measures of horror within it.
Which is what made it kind of stand out on its own and not fall so much into a complete position in a genre.
Exactly.
So,
what do you think about The Warriors? Have you ever seen it? Comment down below.
if you haven't, check it out.
Yeah. And until next time, bye.
Bye.